officially I'm on leave from the stable in Kenya, so I am really in Reading. But most of my work is still in Africa. And I was very interested by the idea of the session. So I'm going to tell you about, well, I'm not going to tell you about apps for statistical literacy, I'm going to ask you about apps for statistical literacy. And this is important because we've actually tried a few things over the last year, and we've got a few experiences, but it's really more of a sort of question which we're putting out there about what we think for the future. We've got some thoughts, but it's really, I hope it's going to lead into some things in the discussion. The first question that sort of keeps coming back to me is if we're talking about apps for statistical literacy or for anything else in Africa, are we talking about them, Africa using them, or Africa developing them? And this is actually very important as part of the questions to have in the back of your mind when you're thinking about this. And so I want to tell you a bit about an experience we had over the last year where we thought it would be a good idea to sort of try and develop some educational apps in Africa. And we did this with a group in Kenya. I'm afraid our funding was even more limited than yours. We did this with a funding of 0. So this was all done on volunteer time and with students as just a sort of project to try and see how it would work. And we were aiming to get apps to develop to support critical thinking through puzzles and games. And it's part of the work we've been doing related to maths camps and maths clubs. And it was really a sort of first step at trying to see, can we try and now get these to be digitalized? Can we get these ideas across digitally? And one of the hold-ups we found, we had a recent UK graduate who's also done a bit of teacher training, who was working with students and colleagues in Kenya. And what we found was that they could produce really basic things which were really text-based, but the sort of critical thinking skills you needed to create imaginative puzzles, to create imaginative sort of gaming environments, they didn't have that exposure. So in some sense, they needed to learn more about critical thinking and gaming and puzzles before they could actually really take the lead in that development. And so, although the technical skills, getting programming skills, was possible quite easily, and it's, the sort of apps that we saw just now, the skills to develop those sorts of apps are very easy to come by, where content is provided, and you just go through and you put it into certain formats and develop it. That's easy. The idea of getting games, or puzzles, things which you engage in, much harder. That what you need to get an artificial intelligence behind a game if you're going to play against something else. That was where the students we were working with were struggling with those skills. Another project we've been involved in over the last year, and this comes really, I'm going to tell you now about a bigger story, because this is actually a very interesting agricultural project we've had, where we've been working with farmers. And although this session is really about apps for official statistics, I think that there's some interesting lessons which have come out of this. So I'm going to take a step back and tell you a little bit about this project we've had with farmers. If you ask farmers in Kenya, has there been climate change? Then they'll all tell you yes. And they'll tell you yes because they think that's what you want to hear, because you ask them if there's been climate change. If you try and ask them more subtly, they'll still tell you that yes, things have been changing. And you try to get out of them how have they been changing. And most people will tell you that rainfall is much worse than it was. It comes later, there's less rain, and it's really not as good. It's worse than it used to be. If you analyse the historical data and see how rainfall has actually changed over time, it's interesting because there's a lot of variability. It changes a lot from year to year, but there's no obvious trend. There's no obvious trend in the amount of rain, and there's no obvious trend in the start of the rains. Often a lot of the development work that happens, people value farmers' perceptions tremendously on this. And they're correct. by and large, farmers' perceptions are right. So what's happened here? Why in this context do the farmers not understand what's happened? But we think we understand this now. We think what's happening is that the farmers associate low yield with bad rainfall. If there's not enough rain, your crops don't grow. The main contributing factor. And their crops haven't been growing as well as they used to. They're getting less and less yield. And they keep hearing in the news all about this climate change. And so they very sensibly say, well, okay, it's not my fault. The reason I'm getting less and less yield is because the climate is changing. And if the climate's changing, that means I'm getting less rainfall, and that's why my crops are not growing as well. It makes a lot of sense. Unfortunately, the data doesn't support their argument. So what we've been doing is we've been showing them data which shows the historical rainfall, and they say, oh, it's not changed. I remember that year when there was lots of rain, yes, I remember that year which was really dry, and there's no obvious trend, and they see this very clearly. And it empowers them. Observing that empowers them. This idea that they can actually take in this information, look at it, deduce there's no trend, and so the problem is not that there is less rainfall now than there was before. The problem is not that the rainy season is coming later. The problem is something else. And this empowers them because the other problems are things which are within their control. They're things like there's soil fertility has gone down. Well, they can do something about that. They can start thinking about fertilizer. They can think about rotation. They recognize the population's increased a lot, and because the population's increased, they're growing on more marginal lands. They're not leaving it fallow. And they can now understand, and they're empowered. And so there's this issue that the understanding of the historical data really can empower them to make better decisions, to understand what are the decisions which affect them. And so the apps we're looking at developing here are to help spread these sorts of workshops. These are workshops which we do with extension workers, but it takes a lot of work to prepare the graphs, to get everything ready, and so they only happen in a few places. So one of the ideas, and this is being developed starting on the 3rd of August, we're getting the app to try and do this. Unfortunately, based on some of our previous experience, this app is not being developed currently within Africa. That was the original design. But we couldn't get the expertise that we could be confident in a short period of time to get the outcome we needed for the sort of price points we needed. And so what's happening is this is going to be initially developed with partners in Reading in the UK, tested in Africa, worked in, and then the hope is that we will then hand it over and the continued development will be happening in Africa. But it's very interesting that we have failed at what I believe and what I've been pushing for, and I was even pushing John for the other apps. We should be trying to get these developed in Africa, and it's not easy, and it really is quite difficult. But the importance, I think, is great, and I'll come back to that later. But one of the points I want to draw out of this story is this fact that I think this is more general than just our experience with farmers. This isn't about agricultural apps necessarily. This is about having information which is given to people who can use that information if they have the literacy, the statistical literacy, to interpret it. And I think we don't actually go down often enough to see what it is that people need, what's the information they can really use, which can help them make decision-making processes. So the next question I'm going to ask is, we're all talking about apps. We're all moving towards the mobile world, the digital world, even browser apps. Apps or software? This is an important question in my mind. You're asking about, are you going to follow the student through? If you're going to follow the student through, in my mind, this isn't an app, this is a learning management system. You're managing something much bigger. To me, that's software. You can have a small app to do something small. If you want to take on a big problem, you need software. Apps against or software. What should we be looking at and why? And especially, my interest in this is really in the African context. And so, it's a shame it's never occurred then. No? Okay. I won't be showing you the video I was going to show. A project, one of my students who some of you will have met, James Nshoka, started, is we've recognised that there is a gap in the Cisco software which is available. It's exactly the gap you mentioned, the fact that people only use Excel. You know, you have wonderful statistic software which is available freely. You know, R is there. Why aren't people using R? It's too hard. It needs to be as easy to use as Excel. If R was as easy to use as Excel, it would be used all over the place. And it would have a huge impact in all sorts of areas. That's the gap that we're trying to fill. And we found, we think, quite an easy way to do this. And so I was going to show you a sort of little clip of James in the campaign video, because the way we're trying to fund this is through crowdfunding. What's interesting to me is our model for this. We're going back to the developed in Africa. We think we have a way of doing this. In fact, I'm fairly certain we have a way of doing this, where the level of, if you want, critical thinking needed is within the range of the sort of students we have to do it. We have an existing product which they're going to be reproducing in a more modern language. They're going to be using R behind. They're not having to do the technical work. R's done all that for them. You're not even having to do the sort of figuring out how to make a good front end, because again, they're reproducing something which already exists. And so we believe this development job is one that can be done very well within the African context. We believe it fills a gap which is really important. This gap of people who only use Excel at the moment because everything else is too hard or too expensive. It exploits the fact that R already exists. It exploits existing software, which means that we do know how to make this easy. And the model we're using is developed in Africa, but with substantial mentorship. So they've actually got the support behind them to grow as individuals. So the people doing this will benefit. The product that comes out should be worthwhile. And it still is relatively cheap. I would have showed you the video, but as you can see, an error occurred, and I don't have time to try later. So, I'm going to step back. I'm going to step back for a minute and just sort of say a little bit about where I feel I've got to in the sort of story I'm trying to tell. I believe quite strongly that if we can involve Africa in the development as well as the use of apps and software, then I think that we can actually be finding solutions which are actually useful more broadly than just in Africa. I think there's a lot to be gained from this. And I think that they're ready for it. But you need to be careful. You need to do this in a way which is within the expertise which is currently available. So you can develop those expertise and they can take on more challenging tasks after. It needs substantial mentorship. And it can have substantial impact. And that's what we're finding from this agricultural example. That actually relatively simple things which would be not necessarily have a large impact elsewhere can have a large impact in the African context. I've got two more very quick things. The first is, I haven't talked about official statistics. And this is, everything I've done has been education, it's been agriculture, it's been statistical software. I don't know what the needs are on the ground for official statistics, but I'm sure they're there. I'm sure if we actually look at small businesses and we sort of say, what is the information that would be useful? And we try and dig down and we get to this, and we can start saying, what is that we can make available. That is something which I believe that the right data could really empower people to make better decisions. And I think that data is sort of available, but it's not getting to the hands of the people who need it. I think that the potential is huge. I think that there is a real potential, but what I don't know is what the process should be to identify the needs. And that's where I feel the gap is. At the moment, most things which are developed based on either the data that's available, because people think there might be less needed, rather than the approach which I quite liked from the agriculture sector. This wasn't my approach, it was some colleagues in Reading who had this approach, who were talking to farmers and who noticed this mismatch and noticed how data could correct it and could really help. So how are we going to identify the data that's needed and how we can make it accessible? So I'm wanting to just finish with a few last thoughts. I've been talking a lot about Africa. You've got to remember, talking about Africa is like talking about Europe. The differences across the continent are huge. But I think they have so many commonalities that it is still worthwhile talking about as a continent. And it's very different if you want to work in Ethiopia than in Kenya, despite the fact that they're neighbours. There's some things I would do in Ethiopia that I would not do in Kenya. There's other things that I do in Kenya that I wouldn't do in Ethiopia. But the needs are almost identical. Kenya, Ethiopia have education systems which are expanding at rates you wouldn't believe. And they have the same problems. They have totally different approaches to solutions. So a lot of the issues are common. And there is a common issue of being able to get digital tools developed locally is something which will have a huge impact across many sectors. If we can have creators, not just consumers of digital technology, that gives the opportunity for sort of local solutions to local problems. And that is something which is worth working towards. And it's not so difficult to achieve. I think it's possible. There's the difficulty, the programming skills are lacking, but that just says that we need to step in, we need to be willing to mentor. It's true, it may be harder to mentor someone else to do it than to do it yourself, but the outcome is worth so much more. So really my finishing thought is really that it's worth pushing to have African creators, not consumers, not just consumers of digital products, and for us to put the effort in to mentor them to make them worthwhile. Thank you.
Again, we have time for 2 quick questions. Dear,
Yes, mine is not a question, it's just a comment. I'm really excited
you
by...
want to announce where you're from?
Sorry, I'm from South Africa, Media Law. And just a comment. You want me to go there?
Just stand up, it must be better.
Yeah. Okay, mine is a comment. Media Law from South Africa. I'm also from Africa. And just to say that I'm really excited about your idea that we want local people to produce products for themselves. We have, this year for example, I've got a 4th-year student that came from a very rural school and had extremely poor mathematics training. And I was surprised to note that by 4th year, he knows not only more than anybody else about technology, but certainly much more than the statistics lecturers, because he's always helping us to improve our products. And when I started speaking to him, he said his school was a project school. And the only thing in technology, and the only thing that he learned really well was actually the computer end of things. And he said he decided that he wanted to know more than any of the teachers. And when they became a project school, it was his final year of schooling. And they invited the grade 12s to go to lessons with the teachers. And he picked it up so fast that the professors in statistics go to him for help. And he's a 4th-year student. And he had no technology up to his final year of grade 12. So there's such potential that just needs to be looked at. That's one thing.
Manfred, do you have a question?
You put the software and the applets in opposition.
Manfred?
I think it is possible. This takes all the authenticity of people when you have to use these microphones. Of course it is.
Now everyone can hear you.
They could hear me earlier. And if I walk back, you can't hear me again. You put it in an opposition. I think Excel is a good compromise because you can customize a lot of things and you can produce applets by Excel. Of course, this is not a data analysis package, but anyway, what you can, when you use it outside, anywhere in profession, Excel is used, or any other spreadsheet. So it is good to improve the knowledge and the skills in Excel and use it to produce applets.
Okay, so I'm just going to clarify my opposition of.
It's okay, the opposition.
So I'm not saying you need one or the other. I think you need both. But I want to clarify that for me, software are substantial packages which are installed, they're on your local machine, whereas apps are very small instances. They're sort of one-off small softwares which you download for a specific instance, a specific thing. And this is the distinction between, your learning management system and your app to teach something. And I think it is an important distinction in the way that current software development is happening. Apps are just a form of software, but they're a relatively recent reinvention of software in small downloadable chunks. That's really how they're conceived. And there's a big push towards apps, but it's something which needs to be counterbalanced by the larger development projects of actual substantial piece of software. That's the sort of the point that I'm making.
I want to just mention you can use Excel to produce applets.
Yes.
Right, thank you very much. Let's show appreciation again.